In the heart of a bustling metropolis known as Lysandria, a city where modern ambition and ancient traditions intertwine, a moment of irreversible consequence unfolded. In a twist of fate, a respected doctor inadvertently inseminated a pure, unblemished young woman with the sperm of a reclusive millionaire. In that fateful instance, the entire course of her life was altered, and a once familiar world was shattered beyond repair. It was a crisp morning at the international headquarters of a prestigious conglomerate. The office, located in a sleek skyscraper in the center of Lysandria, thrummed with relentless activity. Telephones rang in an unceasing cadence, high-ranking executives hurried along marble corridors, and the buzz of determined voices filled every corner of the space. Amidst this organized chaos sat Elara, a tender young woman of barely 18 years, quietly managing the reception area. With graceful composure, she meticulously sorted through piles of documents on a polished desk, each sheet a silent testament to the intricate operations of a global enterprise. Just weeks before, Elara had left behind the gentle rhythms of her pastoral hometown in Samaria, a place where life moved slowly and the scent of freshly brewed tea mingled with the aroma of sun-warmed earth. Though her determination had driven her to embrace this challenging role in the towering metropolis, a wistful homesickness clung to her like a persistent shadow. Every so often, the memory of her mother's kitchen, a sanctuary filled with warm light and the comforting murmur of familiar voices, would flood her thoughts and momentarily overwhelm her in the midst of this high-paced world. By midday, as the hectic pulse of the office ebbed ever so slightly, Elara sensed an unexpected and sharp pain twisting in her lower abdomen. She instinctively placed a trembling hand over the spot, wincing as a wave of discomfort rippled through her. Convincing herself that it was merely the consequence of stress and the daunting demands of a new beginning, she decided to step outside for a breath of fresh air. Yet as she ventured out onto the busy streets of Lysandria, the discomfort worsened, the pain deepened, leaving her feeling faint and disoriented. The city streets teemed with life. Businessmen in tailored suits, curious tourists with wide eyes, and enthusiastic vendors hawked their vibrant wares on crowded sidewalks. Leaning against a cool brick wall for support, Elara's eyes scanned the busy thoroughfare until they fell upon a striking sign. A sophisticated emblem atop a fertility clinic. Its understated elegance glimmered under the brilliant midday sun, offering a subtle promise of hope. In the quiet corners of her memory, she recalled that such clinics were revered in her native Samaria for their advanced treatments and compassionate care. If there were anyone who could offer relief and guidance, it would be them. Inside the clinic, the ambiance was one of pristine calm and refined order. The walls, painted in a gentle ivory hue, seemed to absorb the hushed whispers of the staff as they moved silently among the patients. At the reception counter stood a poised woman draped in a meticulously tailored ebony abaya. With chic sunglasses resting atop her head, she exuded an air of sophistication as she handled the day's schedule. "I am Veronica Delacroix," she announced crisply, setting down a finely bound leather notebook before stating, "I had an appointment with Dr. Whitaker, but an urgent matter has arisen." Without pausing for any further discussion, she dismissed the matter with an imperious tone and strode away, the click of her heels resonating against the marble floor. In the flurry of activity that ensued, the receptionist, briefly distracted, failed to remove Veronica's appointment from the active schedule. A few feet away, Elara observed the commotion with a sense of quiet curiosity, her discomfort slowly easing even as an inexplicable sense of foreboding began to take root within her. As the minutes ticked by, the initial pain subsided into a dull throb, replaced by an inner uncertainty that made her heart flutter. When her turn finally arrived, she approached the reception counter with soft-spoken words. "I'm sorry to trouble you, but I'm experiencing severe pain in my lower abdomen. Might someone please check on me?" The receptionist, still engrossed in the clutter of patient records, offered a brief, distracted nod and replied, "Is this your first time here? Dr. Whitaker is in room 3 and will attend to you shortly." With that, a slip of paper was hastily scribbled with instructions and handed over as the phone rang insistently in the background. Clutching the fragile note, Elara navigated the corridor to room 3. The hallways were dimly lit in contrast to the bright, busy streets outside, and each step deepened her mix of anxiety and tentative hope. Upon entering the room, a nurse cast a fleeting glance her way before instructing her in a curt tone, "Please disrobe from the waist down and put on this gown. The doctor will be with you momentarily." The request sent a shiver down Elara's spine. This was her first solo medical examination, and though she hesitated for a moment, she reminded herself that in this progressive city of Lysandria, the modern medical practices were held in the highest regard. Complying with the instructions, she gingerly changed, feeling vulnerable yet trusting in the expertise that the sterile white environment promised. Soon after, the door swung open and a man in a crisp white coat stepped in. His confident demeanor was underscored by a calm, authoritative smile that immediately lent a sense of reassurance. "I'm Dr. Langley," he introduced himself, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone accustomed to handling emergencies. "I understand you are experiencing some discomfort?" Elara managed to reply, her voice wavering as she explained, "It's only a pain that feels like intense cramps." Dr. Langley nodded while carefully reviewing a set of documents in his hand, a set that, unbeknownst to both of them, did not belong to her. "It appears to be completely routine," he assured her, "and we shall administer a mild analgesic to help you relax before proceeding with the necessary evaluation." When Elara timidly inquired, "Proceed with what exactly?" his gentle smile broadened as he responded, "Just a scheduled procedure that is entirely ordinary. You have nothing to fear." Though some finality lingered in his tone, a hint of a secret left unsaid, Elara, burdened by pain, placed her trust in his expertise. With a deep, resigned breath, she swallowed the medication he administered and reclined on the examination table. "Just breathe," Dr. Langley instructed in a calm, measured tone as he began his work. In the hazy veil of sedation, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to be carried away by the procedure. When the treatment finally concluded, Dr. Langley helped her sit up slowly, his face inscrutable as he explained, "Everything went smoothly. Please avoid any strenuous activity and return for a follow-up appointment in a few weeks." Although still disoriented by the procedure, Elara nodded in quiet acceptance. The pain had receded, replaced by an odd sense of relief, but also by a lingering question that clung to her like a shadow. After dressing and smoothing her skirt, Elara stepped back into the bright afternoon. The city outside moved on as if nothing had happened, its rhythm both indifferent and mesmerizing. She hurried back to the bustling office, trying to push away the haunting whispers of uncertainty that trailed her with every step. In the midst of organizing yet another mountain of files, the steady hum of work offered her a temporary escape from her inner turmoil. Without warning, a deep, resonant voice broke through the ambient chatter. "Elara!" The sound halted her in her tracks. She looked up to see a tall, imposing man with graying hair and eyes that bore the weight of many unspoken secrets. Standing before her was Damien Al-Miraj, the formidable director of the company. His mere presence commanded respect and exuded years of experience and wisdom, a stark contrast to the innocence and vulnerability that still lingered in her eyes. For a long, suspended moment, time seemed to stand still as they regarded one another in silence. The cacophony of the office faded into insignificance as an unspoken connection bridged the gap between them. Later that day, Elara carried an important set of documents to the marketing department, the rhythmic act of walking serving to clear her mind. Yet, upon returning to the lobby, her heart skipped a beat at the sight of a striking figure entering the room. A woman dressed in a flowing crimson gown. Her golden hair cascaded effortlessly over her shoulders, and each measured step radiated an aura of undeniable power. In that instant, a cold electric familiarity surged through Elara. The woman in the red dress was unmistakable, the same elegant figure she had seen earlier at the fertility clinic. Before Elara could gather her thoughts, the woman paused, turned ever so slightly, and their eyes met in a charged moment of recognition. Though the mysterious visitor's expression remained composed and inscrutable, the intensity of her gaze conveyed that she, too, recalled that significant moment from earlier. It was only when the realization finally struck Elara that she understood the full gravity of the situation. The enigmatic woman was none other than Veronica Delacroix, the very person who had abruptly left the clinic that fateful morning. Moreover, Veronica was none other than the wife of Damien Al-Miraj, a fact that added layers of complexity and uncertainty to the unfolding drama. Later that day, within the hushed confines of Damien's private office, an environment heavy with both the echoes of past conflicts and the fresh sting of present disappointments, Veronica entered with measured steps. Her entrance was heralded by the deliberate click of her high heels against the polished floor. "You missed your appointment," Damien remarked in a measured tone that carried both disappointment and something unspoken. as if the missed meeting had far greater implications than a mere scheduling error. Veronica exhaled softly, removing her delicate earrings as though the topic were exhausting her. "An urgent matter arose at the company today," she replied dismissively. But Damien's expression hardened as he continued. "This is our chance, isn't it?" His voice, though carefully controlled, betrayed an undercurrent of longing and loss that resonated deep within the confines of the office. "Veronica," he began, but then hesitated, as if the very name, now transformed into distant memory, stirred conflicting emotions. Veronica, sensing his internal battle, leaned casually against the sleek desk. "Damien," she said quietly, "do we truly share the same vision anymore?" The question hung in the air, a chasm of unspoken regrets and unmet expectations between them. For a brief, poignant moment, the office was filled with the weight of their unfulfilled dreams. A silence so deep that even the ambient hum of distant city sounds seemed to fade away. "I want a legacy," Damien eventually confessed, his voice raw with the admission. "I want something more enduring than fleeting success." Yet the answer that resonated in the quiet space was one that neither could fully embrace. As the evening shadows grew longer, the bustling office slowly emptied, leaving behind only the lingering remnants of a day filled with unexpected turns and bittersweet revelations. Elara, still grappling with the remnants of her earlier unease, gathered her belongings in the dimming light of dusk. The weight of exhaustion was tempered by the unresolved questions that now punctuated her thoughts. Turning a quiet corner, lost in contemplation, she unexpectedly collided with someone. Papers fluttered to the ground in a sudden burst of chaos. As she dropped to her knees to retrieve the scattered documents, a firm, concerned voice spoke out. "Elara," it said. Looking up, she saw Damien Almiraj once again, his dark eyes fixated on a receipt that had fallen between them. The inscription on the receipt read, "New Dawn Fertility Clinic," a stark reminder of the events of the day. His expression shifted imperceptibly, betraying a mix of concern and something far more personal. "Were you at this clinic today?" he inquired gently. After a hesitant pause, Elara nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I only went because of a sharp stomach pain." Damien's grip on the receipt tightened and his brow furrowed with an intensity that hinted at deeper questions. "Are you undergoing any form of fertility treatment?" he pressed, his tone laced with disbelief. Elara's initial, incredulous laughter faltered as she realized the gravity of the misunderstanding. "No, absolutely not," she clarified quickly. "Today happens to be my 18th birthday, and the idea of having a child is the furthest thing from my mind." For a moment, Damien's eyes widened in surprise as the unexpected revelation softened the tension in his features. "Your birthday is today?" he murmured, his tone gentler. Elara nodded timidly, and the brief spark of kindness that flared in his eyes was quickly overshadowed by a deeper, unspoken sorrow. Then, "Happy birthday, Elara," he said quietly, offering a sincere smile that was both surprising and heartwarming. "Come with me. I insist on seeing you safely home." Barely able to believe his generosity, Elara hesitated only for a moment before accepting his offer. Together they walked toward the company's sleek parking area, where Damien pressed a button on his key fob. In the distance, a luxurious black Rolls-Royce Phantom shone under the evening lights, a symbol of both success and the heavy burden of unfulfilled dreams. "Is that your car?" she asked in awe, still marveling at the opulence before her. With a calm nod, Damien gracefully opened the passenger door. "Of course, Ms. Osmond. Please, come in." Inside the sumptuous interior, as the engine's low purr mingled with the quiet hum of the night, the atmosphere shifted from formality to something more intimate. After a spell of reflective silence, Elara ventured cautiously. "I happened to see your wife today, sir. Veronica, she was absolutely stunning." The compliment, however, seemed to cast a fleeting shadow over Damien's face, a subtle hint that beauty and brilliance often masked deeper, more painful truths. Once more, the conversation turned introspective as Damien's grip on the steering wheel tightened ever so slightly. "Thank you," he replied, his voice measured and subdued. After a long pause, he then asked, "Elara, may I impose upon you for a small favor?" Taken aback by the unexpected request, she replied earnestly, "Of course, Mr. Almiraj, anything you need." With a controlled exhale that spoke of buried emotion, he added, "Please, never ask me that question again." The words, though delivered calmly, resonated with an unspoken sorrow. a sorrow born of years of unfulfilled longing and the perpetual chase for a legacy. A solitary tear threatened to escape from the corner of his eye, quickly brushed away before it could fall. "I'm sorry," Elara murmured, regret tinting her voice. "I did not mean to intrude on something so personal." Shaking his head gently, Damien offered a soft, forgiving smile. "No, forgive me, Elara. You could never have known." His eyes, a well of gratitude and despair, searched hers with a mix of hope and resignation. "I do not have a child, yet there is nothing I desire more in this world," he confessed in a low voice that seemed to echo with the weight of unspoken dreams. Elara's heart ached at the raw vulnerability that shone through his carefully maintained facade. In that moment of quiet understanding, the two shared a silence that spoke volumes. A silence filled with both longing and the bittersweet acknowledgement of life's unpredictable turns. Finally, after several long, reflective moments, Damien broke the silence once more. "You know, Elara, life has a curious way of dressing us in success and then letting us believe we are invincible," he said, his tone mingling admiration with melancholy. "Yet, no amount of triumph can ever fill the emptiness that sometimes lingers within." Elara, her voice soft and tentative, offered a small, reflective reply. "Perhaps success lifts us so high that we forget the simple truth of what it means to feel truly alive, to know the taste of both victory and loss." Their conversation drifted into a gentle cadence as the city lights of Lysandria began to sparkle in the twilight, a quiet metaphor for the delicate interplay of hope and despair that wove through the fabric of their lives. Thus, in the waning hours of that eventful day, Elara's world had shifted irrevocably. What began as an ordinary day at a bustling company had become a tapestry of chance encounters, poignant revelations, and dreams that were as fragile as they were ambitious. And somewhere, deep within the complexities of fate, a single accidental act in a sterile clinic had set in motion a series of events that would forever alter the destinies of those involved. Elara's soft-spoken words had faded into the twilight as the car wound its way through the city's labyrinth of flickering streetlights and deepening shadows. In that quiet moment, while the hum of the engine provided a steady counterpoint to her racing thoughts, Darius, whose face bore the weight of unsaid emotions, turned to her with an expression that was impossible to decipher. His eyes, dark and stormy, hinted at layers of regret and secret longing. Yet, as the night pressed in, Elara said no more, allowing the silence between them to carry the meaning of her unspoken desires. She had often confessed her yearning to feel the earth beneath her bare feet, a desire to reconnect with nature, to lose herself in the simplicity of raw existence. Now, as the car surged forward, that yearning mingled with a quiet resignation. Their journey ended at the expansive Ashcroft estate, perched majestically atop the verdant hills bordering the ancient city of Viridia. The mansion loomed like an impregnable fortress, its grand facade bathed in the soft golden glow of strategically placed lights. Entering through its ornate gates, one was immediately enveloped in an intoxicating blend of fragrances, the delicate aroma of night-blooming jasmine intertwined with the warm, resinous scent of amber. Somewhere in the distance, the haunting strains of an oud played a melancholic tune that seemed to echo the hearts of those who walked these hallowed halls. Inside, in the opulent foyer, Isabella Ashcroft, Darius's wife, prepared herself for the evening ahead. Standing before an intricately carved gilded mirror, she meticulously adjusted her appearance. Her golden hair, styled with impeccable care, fell in soft waves over her shoulder as she corrected a stray curl. Draped in a fitted deep crimson gown that accentuated her every curve, Isabella exuded a presence that was both commanding and enigmatic. Every detail of the evening had been planned with painstaking precision. The candlelit dinner arranged in a grand salon with antique silk napkins, a selection of fine wines curated by her own discerning taste, and the ambient lighting designed to evoke memories of lost passion. Yet despite her careful orchestration, nothing could have prepared her for the look that would soon cross Darius's face as he entered their sanctuary. After a long day filled with the relentless pressures of corporate power and private torment, Darius stepped through the grand entrance. The exhaustion written on his face stood in stark contrast to the inviting warmth of the meticulously arranged surroundings. "My love, welcome home," Isabella cooed softly as she glided toward him, her movements reminiscent of a feline on the prowl. "I've been waiting for you." And I have a surprise." With a practiced allure, she wrapped her arms around his neck and leaned in for a tender kiss. A kiss meant to seal their evening with promises of rekindled passion. Yet, Darius, still caught in the shadows of his thoughts, gently withdrew from the embrace, slipping out of his tailored blazer as if shedding the burdens of a long day. He avoided her gaze, and with a quiet, measured tone, he murmured, "Thank you, Isabella, but I'm not in the mood. Today has been an endless series of trials." Her smile faltered, though she refused to yield easily. Caressing his cheek with a delicate hand, she whispered his name, as if seeking to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. "Darius," she pleaded softly, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and exasperation. "I can't stop thinking about today, about the appointment you canceled." Her words cut through the air, laden with the bitterness of unmet expectations and unresolved conflict. A tense silence fell between them, as Darius's eyes darkened with a conflict he could no longer conceal. "Are we really going to revisit this painful cycle again?" he questioned, his voice heavy with resignation. "I have spent years conforming to your expectations, bending to every whim you've imposed, yet I have dreams, ambitions, aspirations that matter too. My success, my integrity must come first." His words hung in the air like a challenge, a declaration of independence that left Isabella reeling. For a long moment neither moved. Then, with a hesitant gentleness that betrayed her inner turmoil, Isabella stepped forward once more, reaching for him. "Come to me, Darius. Let us not fight tonight. Let us find peace instead." But Darius shook his head slowly, retreating just beyond her outstretched hand. "This isn't about reconciliation, Isabella," he said, his tone resolute yet sorrowful. "It's about honesty, something you haven't shown from the very beginning." His eyes searched hers desperately, as if trying to find remnants of the love they once shared. Isabella let out a sigh of defeat, her arms falling to her sides in resignation, as if every hope for unity was slipping away. Finally, with an air of reluctant acceptance, she muttered, "Fine, if that is what you want, then I will go to the clinic this week and have the procedure performed." The weight of her words filled the room, a thick silence following that declaration, heavy with implications that neither could escape. For the first time that night, Isabella's once unwavering composure wavered. Uncertainty clouded her usually sharp features. Darius took a slow step toward the sweeping staircase, then paused as if on the brink of confessing a long-held secret. His voice, now softer and yet laced with unwavering firmness, broke the silence. "We don't need more words tonight, Isabella. Just think. Are we even walking toward the same horizon anymore?" His words, austere and melancholic, reverberated in her mind, planting seeds of doubt that grew with each passing second. "Sometimes," he mused silently, "the architects of our grandest dreams forget that the unpredictable winds of fate can dismantle even the sturdiest of structures." In the days that followed, Isabella felt an ever-growing disquiet regarding the state of her marriage. The increasing detachment in Darius's behavior, coupled with his insistence that parenthood should never be forced, had driven a wedge between them that seemed insurmountable. Yet Isabella, desperate not to lose the man she had once loved, resolved to take matters into her own hands. If reason would not bridge the widening gap between them, then decisive action was required. Convinced that a child might be the remedy to heal their fractured bond, she devised a clandestine plan. Early one crisp morning, Isabella ventured into the Aurora Hope Fertility Clinic, a modern facility renowned for its discreet yet advanced reproductive services. Determined to undo the cancellation she had made weeks before, she carefully arranged a new appointment. Aware of the necessity for absolute secrecy, she used her personal account to ensure that no connection to Darius would be traceable. Isabella had selected a time slot during which she was certain Darius would be absorbed in his endless meetings, leaving her free to proceed unnoticed. Entering the clinic with the same grace she was known for, she wore a finely tailored dark abaya that accentuated her elegance. Every aspect of her appearance was immaculate. Her hair neatly styled, her jewelry understated yet signifying luxury, and her posture exuding confidence. Yet, behind this poised exterior, a ripple of inner disquiet stirred, hinting at the turbulent emotions churning beneath the surface. Approaching the reception desk with a calm but determined smile, Isabella presented her identification and stated crisply, "Good morning, I would like to reschedule my procedure." The receptionist, a young woman clad in a sharply pressed uniform, acknowledged her request by tapping at the keyboard. However, as the system processed her details, the receptionist's expression changed dramatically. A chill of apprehension seemed to pass over her features as she confirmed a detail that was utterly impossible. The screen displayed that the very procedure Isabella had intended to reschedule had already been performed 2 weeks earlier. Her hands trembled momentarily over the keyboard as she tried to comprehend the shocking revelation. "It must be an error," Isabella insisted, her voice rising in disbelief. Yet the records were irrefutable. The receptionist hesitated before finally speaking. "Mrs. Ashcroft, according to our records, your procedure was completed 2 weeks ago." Isabella's breath caught in her throat as the words sunk in, a sensation of dread gripping her heart. "That's not possible," she protested, her tone increasingly agitated. "I am Darius Ashcroft's wife, and I canceled my previous appointment. There is no way this could have happened." The receptionist, visibly unnerved, glanced around the lobby as if seeking reassurance, her eyes darting nervously as she tried to navigate the sudden, tense atmosphere. Fueled by a mixture of anger and desperation, Isabella demanded, "I need to speak with Dr. Hamilton immediately." The receptionist fumbled with the intercom and summoned the doctor without delay. Moments later, a composed nurse appeared and led Isabella into a private consultation room, a sanctuary meant for resolving such crises. Each step she took was punctuated by the click of her elegant heels against the marble floor, her movements sharp and determined as her anger simmered just below the surface. Dr. Hamilton, an older gentleman with decades of experience etched into the lines on his face, greeted her with a practiced calm. "Mrs. Ashcroft, I understand your concern. Please, allow me to investigate this matter." He began to sift through the records with meticulous care, his brows furrowing as he noted discrepancies that defied explanation. The system indicated that the procedure had been carried out on a day when he himself had been absent due to a family emergency. In his stead, the attending physician was none other than Dr. Montgomery, a doctor temporarily assigned that week and who now worked in a different branch of the clinic, far from here. "Mrs. Ashcroft, it appears your procedure was performed by Dr. Montgomery," Dr. Hamilton explained slowly, his voice carrying the weight of unwelcome news. "Let me contact him for clarification." Isabella's arms crossed tightly over her chest as her patience thinned, her eyes glinting with barely restrained fury. Dr. Hamilton placed a call, and when Dr. Montgomery answered, his initial response was vague, a litany of multiple procedures that week and an inability to recall specific details immediately. However, as Dr. Hamilton described the case in detail, a flicker of recognition lit up on Dr. Montgomery's face. "A young woman, yes," Dr. Montgomery recalled, his tone tentative. "She was visibly nervous and complained of abdominal pain, which is not uncommon before the procedure." Dr. Hamilton listened intently, his fingers tightening on the phone as the description unfolded. "But the patient I am describing does not match your account, Mrs. Ashcroft," he finally said, his voice low and troubled. "The woman I treated was of a markedly different background, a refined, sophisticated individual of European Turkish descent. The patient I encountered was younger, less experienced with the process." "Can you be sure?" Dr. Hamilton's carefully measured inquiry hung in the air, amplifying Isabella's rising anxiety. A shiver of dread passed through her as Dr. Montgomery's words crystallized the reality of the error. Isabella's hands clenched into fists and her eyes flashed with indignation. "This is outrageous," she hissed, her voice trembling with both fury and despair. "You implanted my husband's sample into someone else? Do you have any idea what you have done?" Dr. Hamilton tried to interject, his tone pleading, "Mrs. Ashcroft, please understand that this was an unfortunate error, but it cannot be undone." With a forceful slam of her hand against the desk, Isabella cut him off, her voice rising in a cold, calculated command. "Reverse the procedure. Give me the insemination instead." A heavy silence followed, filled with the unspoken implications of her demand. Dr. Hamilton exhaled slowly, choosing his words with great care. "Mrs. Ashcroft, I regret to inform you that reversing this mistake is not possible. Your husband's sample was used in its entirety, as dictated by his medical history. It was not divided into portions." At these words, Isabella's breath hitched. The ground beneath her seemed to crumble, and she felt as if an abyss were opening at her feet. Her already fragile marriage now teetered on the brink of complete collapse. Driven by an overwhelming fear of losing everything, Isabella made a bold, desperate decision. "Doctor," she insisted, her voice low but resolute. "I do not care what it takes. Find another sample and proceed immediately." Dr. Hamilton shifted uncomfortably in his chair, caught between his professionalism and the enormity of the situation. "Mrs. Ashcroft, I must caution you that this decision should involve both you and your husband. Darius has always been clear about his desire, a biological child of his own. This is a decision that belongs to both of you." Isabella leaned forward, her gaze unflinching and her tone icy. "Listen to me carefully, Doctor. If this mistake gets out, it won't just ruin your clinic. It will destroy my husband's life. But if you cooperate, none of us need to suffer. You, Darius, and I can all walk away without scandal, without fallout." Her words dropped to a near whisper, cold and calculated. "Do you know how much he yearns for a child? To see him broken would be unbearable, and if that happens, you will be the one to suffer. The loss of your license, your reputation, and everything you've built." A long silence stretched between them as Dr. Hamilton absorbed her threat, the weight of her ultimatum bearing down on him. Finally, his defeated sigh broke the stillness. "Fine," he muttered. "We will proceed as you requested." For a moment, a wave of triumph washed over Isabella, though it was tainted by a heaviness she had not anticipated. The price she was now willing to pay loomed larger than ever before. 4 weeks had passed since that fateful mistake at the clinic, and the repercussions still rippled through every aspect of her life. In a stark contrast to the private storm raging within her, the conference room of the Ashcroft corporate headquarters buzzed with quiet intensity. Warm light reflected off polished wood panels and glass surfaces, while complex graphs and market projections illuminated the expansive screen at the front of the room. Investors leaned forward, hanging on every word as Darius delivered his presentation with the practiced authority of a seasoned executive. At his side, Elara moved with quiet efficiency, adjusting files, cross-referencing notes, and ensuring that every detail supported his strategic pitch. Then, as if fate had conspired to intertwine their personal and professional lives even further, a sharp, unanticipated pain bloomed in Elara's stomach. At first it manifested as a slight twinge, easily dismissed as a passing discomfort, but within seconds a wave of nausea overwhelmed her, crashing over her like an unrelenting tide. Clutching her abdomen in a desperate attempt to stem the rising tide of pain, she inhaled deeply, silently pleading that this moment would pass quickly. "Darius," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible over the ambient murmurs of the conference room. Elara's steady composure was shattered mid-sentence as she inadvertently revealed her inner turmoil. In the midst of a bustling board meeting, she shuffled through her papers with trembling fingers, her anxious energy palpable to everyone nearby. Darius, seated at the head of the conference table, observed her subtle distress from the corner of his eye, his normally inscrutable brow furrowed with concern, but he continued speaking in his measured tone, striving to maintain order in the meeting. Then, in a sudden and unanticipated moment, the inevitable happened. Her pen slipped from her grasp and clattered noisily onto the polished table surface. In an instant, the color drained from her face as if a shadow had been cast over her entire being. A cold sweat began to bead along her hairline, and the quiet murmur of the meeting was punctuated by a ripple of shocked silence. Unable to contain her rising panic, Elara abruptly stood, knocking her chair backwards as she stumbled from her seat. In a small, barely audible voice she murmured, "Excuse me, I'm so sorry," before hastily turning toward the exit. No one had time to react before she vanished through the door. Darius's gaze followed her departure, his expression a complex blend of concern and controlled urgency. An investor, sensing the disruption in the meeting's focus, called out, "Mr. Almiraj, is everything all right?" Yet Darius, determined to keep the proceedings on track, paid no heed to the inquiry. He set down his documents with deliberate calm and addressed his assistant in a firm yet measured tone. "Michael, finish the presentation." There was no room for debate or delay, and as murmurs began to ripple among the attendees, Darius rose from his chair and strode purposefully toward the door. The heavy conference room doors swung shut behind him, muffling the residual voices as he hurried along the corridor in search of Elara. The echo of his footsteps reverberated in the quiet hallway until a muffled sound caught his attention, a sound that made his chest tighten with apprehension. Quickening his pace, Darius followed the unsettling noise until he reached the entrance of the restroom. There, behind a slightly ajar door, he heard the unmistakable sound of retching, punctuated by erratic, unsteady breathing. "Nadia," he called out sharply, though the name escaped him in a moment of habit. His heart pounded with rising concern. A brief pause ensued, and then a faint, trembling voice responded. "I'm fine, just give me a minute, I'll be back soon." Darius, however, was not convinced by the quiet reassurance. "Forget about the meeting," he insisted with a sense of urgency. "Come out now, I'm taking you to the hospital." Minutes later, they arrived together at the emergency room. The sterile white corridors of the hospital, a stark contrast to the opulence of their earlier surroundings. In the emergency room, Darius remained steadfastly at Elara's side as the medical staff initiated routine checks. Nurses measured her vitals, asked a series of methodical questions, and carefully drew a blood sample. Time seemed to stretch interminably as anxious moments ticked by until finally a doctor entered the cubicle. Clutching a clipboard and maintaining a professional expression, the doctor's eyes betrayed a glimmer of surprise as he began his report. "Miss Osman," the doctor began in a measured tone, "your test results are largely within normal limits, except for one significant finding." The air in the cramped examination room grew unbearably heavy as his words sank in. Elara's eyes widened in shock, and Darius, sitting close beside her, felt the crushing weight of the moment settle upon his shoulders. "I'm sorry, what?" she managed to ask in disbelief, her voice trembling with incredulity. The doctor met her startled gaze with calm assurance. "According to your blood work, you are a few weeks along," he stated, his tone clinical yet kind. Elara's head shook in disbelief. "No, that's impossible. There must be some mistake," she insisted, her voice rising as confusion and panic mingled in her tone. The doctor arched a brow and asked, "Why do you say that?" Elara's voice trembled as she replied, "Because I am a virgin." For the first time, the doctor's professional composure wavered, though he quickly regained control. "I can assure you, Miss Osmond, the pregnancy is real," he said gently. "We can confirm with an ultrasound if you wish." Overwhelmed and shaken, Darius straightened in his chair, his arms crossing tightly as he leaned forward. "To the scan, whatever it takes," he declared firmly. Elara, tears threatening to spill from her eyes, could barely muster a weak shake of her head, her voice barely audible as she whispered, This can't be happening." The doctor's tone softened further as he sought to guide them through the unfolding crisis. "Let's take this step by step. We'll conduct further tests and then perform an ultrasound. You're not alone in this," he reassured them. After a brief interval, Elara found herself lying on an examination bed in a dimly lit room. The only illumination emanated from the soft glow of the ultrasound monitor. Clutching the edge of the thin hospital gown, her fingers dug into the fabric as she pressed her hand against her stomach, trying to steady the tumult of emotions swirling within her. Each of her breaths came in slow, nervous intervals as Darius stood nearby, his expression unreadable while he struggled to process the gravity of what was happening. The doctor adjusted the ultrasound machine, squeezing a cool layer of gel onto Elara's abdomen before instructing, "Try to relax. This won't take long." The transducer glided over her skin, and soon the monitor flickered to life. Elara's tense features remained fixed on the screen as her eyes tracked every deliberate movement of the doctor's hand. After a moment of silent analysis, the doctor murmured, "All right, I'm looking for the gestational sac." He then turned to face them with a measured smile that slowly brightened his features. "Congratulations, Miss Osmond. You are carrying twins." Elara's eyes widened in pure disbelief as she stared at the screen, where two small dark shapes were clearly visible, nestled side by side in the developing sac. "This is completely normal for a pregnancy at 4 weeks, the doctor continued, pointing to the embryonic formations. "Both are forming as expected, and within a week or two we should be able to detect their heartbeats." Elara's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the bed, her voice barely a whisper as she repeated, "Twins." The doctor nodded reassuringly. "Yes, you're going to have 2 babies." At that moment, Darius, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, finally exhaled a deep, conflicted sigh. Stepping closer, his gaze hardened as he studied Elara's distraught expression. In a careful yet insistent tone, he asked, "You're absolutely sure you haven't been with anyone recently?" Startled, Elara's head snapped toward him, anger and hurt flashing across her face. "I already told you, Mr. Almiraj," she insisted, her voice thick with emotion. "I am a virgin. This This doesn't make any sense. Darius raised his hands in a placating gesture, stepping back slightly. I'm sorry, Elara. I truly believe you, but we need to understand what is happening here. His words hung in the charged silence of the room, heavy with the implications of a truth he was only beginning to grasp. As the gravity of the situation settled, a sudden clarity struck Darius like a bolt of lightning. In the recesses of his mind, a memory emerged, the receipt from the fertility clinic he had seen weeks ago. His heartbeat quickened as the pieces of a perplexing puzzle began to fall into place. Lowering his voice to a firm yet quiet whisper, he said, Elara, I think I know what happened. I believe you were mistakenly, artificially inseminated with a donor's sample. For a long, heart-stopping moment, Elara's lips parted in shock, but no words came forth. Her hands trembled as she grasped the fabric of her gown, trying to steady the storm raging inside her. Darius inhaled deeply before adding, with gentle resolve, I'll be waiting outside. Let's finish here and then go to Nova Hope Fertility Clinic. We need answers, and you are not alone in this. Without waiting for her immediate response, he quietly exited the room, leaving Elara to confront the overwhelming chaos of emotions swirling within her. In the silent aftermath of the revelation, the thought that a mistake at the very beginning could irrevocably alter everything weighed on her. A mistake in the early stages did not change the nature of what followed. Sometimes, what emerges from uncertainty can become the most unexpected truth of all. Outside, the sleek obsidian Rolls-Royce Phantom awaited them like a ghost from another world. Its headlights cut through the darkness as it pulled up to the entrance of Nova Hope Fertility Clinic. Darius stepped out first, exuding the familiar aura of authority, while Elara followed hesitantly, her steps betraying the tension and inner turmoil that gripped her. As they crossed the threshold, the cool air of the clinic's lobby welcomed them. A quiet mingling of hushed conversations and the steady click of heels against polished marble floors. A receptionist, a young woman with chestnut-brown hair and an air of composed professionalism, greeted them with a polite smile. "Welcome to Nova Hope Fertility Clinic. How may I assist you?" she inquired. Elara's eyes darted around, searching for any hint of familiarity. In a subdued tone, she asked, "Excuse me, but where is the receptionist who was here a month ago?" The woman arched an eyebrow and replied matter-of-factly, "I'm afraid she no longer works here. I started just a few weeks ago." The revelation sent a shiver down Elara's spine, as if this missing link would only complicate the search for the truth. Darius stepped forward, his stance unwavering and authoritative. "We need to speak with Dr. Bain immediately," he declared. "I am Darius Al-Miraj, chairman of Al-Miraj Enterprises, and I demand to discuss an extremely urgent matter regarding a procedure performed on Ms. Elara Osman. I will not tolerate any delays or evasions." The receptionist hesitated briefly, weighing her options, then, after a short phone call, gestured toward the waiting area. "Please wait here. Dr. Bain will see you shortly." Moments later, they were led into the modest yet functional office of Dr. Bain. Although he maintained a composed facade, his subtle unease did not go unnoticed as he greeted them with a slight nod. "Mr. Al-Miraj, Miss Osman, how can I assist you today?" Darius wasted no time. Taking a seat across from the doctor's desk, his eyes remained sharp and unyielding. "Doctor," he began, his voice controlled but edged with steel. "1 month ago, Miss Osman came to this clinic as a virgin. Now, she is inexplicably pregnant. She recalls undergoing a procedure she did not fully understand, something far beyond a routine examination. I need to know exactly what transpired on that day." Dr. Bain blinked, clearly taken aback by the accusation, yet his tone remained measured. "Mr. Al-Miraj, allow me to review our records before drawing any conclusions." He turned to his computer and began scanning the digital files with practiced precision. After a tense silence, he spoke. "According to our records, Miss Osman was attended to that day by Dr. Aldridge, who was covering for me during my absence due to a family emergency. The notes indicate that you presented with abdominal discomfort, and nothing abnormal was recorded." Elara immediately shook her head, her voice trembling but resolute as she countered. "That is not possible. I distinctly remember that I underwent a procedure and I was given a painkiller beforehand. It wasn't merely a checkup." Darius's lips pressed into a thin line and his tone dropped to a more forceful whisper as he interjected, "Doctor, I am asking for the truth. Something happened here, and I will not accept vague explanations." Dr. Bain's face remained impassive for a moment, though the tension in the room was palpable. "Monsieur Almiraj," he finally said in a carefully neutral tone, "I assure you that all procedures conducted at this facility are thoroughly documented. Everything that transpired is recorded in our files." But Darius, ever vigilant, was not swayed. His mind raced with the implications of the error and the earlier events that had led to this moment. As the conversation reached an impasse, Darius's eyes hardened with determination. He leaned forward, his voice low and resolute. "Doctor, I know that this explanation sounds plausible on paper, but there is an undeniable discrepancy. My wife's account, the test results, and the memory of that fateful day all point to a grievous mistake. I demand clarity now." Dr. Bain's eyes flickered with an emotion that he tried to conceal, and for a moment the room fell silent as the weight of the unresolved mystery pressed down on them. At that moment, Darius's mind flashed back to the fertility clinic receipt he had seen weeks earlier. A small, seemingly insignificant document that now held the key to unraveling the entire mystery. He spoke softly, yet with unwavering conviction. "Elara, I think I know what happened. I believe you were mistakenly, artificially inseminated with a donor's sample." His words, uttered with both sorrow and determination, hung heavily in the air. Elara's eyes widened in disbelief, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the desk, trying to steady herself in the midst of this devastating revelation. There was a long, agonizing pause before Darius continued. "Doctor, I demand that you help us rectify this error immediately. We need to retrieve a correct sample, or at the very least, secure answers that will clear our names and restore our peace." Dr. Bain, visibly troubled by the ultimatum, hesitated before finally replying, "Mr. Almiraj, the procedures performed here are irreversible. I must caution you that any attempt to re-inseminate or alter the process could jeopardize not only your wife's health, but also our entire facility's credibility." Darius's eyes narrowed, and his tone turned icy. "Doctor, if this mistake gets out, it will not only ruin your clinic, it will destroy my husband's life. I am prepared to take every measure necessary to ensure that no scandal unfolds, provided you cooperate fully with us." The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence as the doctor weighed the gravity of Darius's threat against his professional ethics. After what seemed like an eternity, Dr. Bain finally exhaled in defeat. "Fine," he muttered, "we will proceed as you requested." In that moment, a conflicted wave of triumph and dread washed over Elara, for the price she was willing to pay now seemed higher than she had ever imagined. As the meeting concluded, Darius and Elara left the office with heavy hearts, their minds burdened by the revelations and the uncertain road ahead. Outside, the cool night embraced them as they entered the waiting area of the clinic. The promise of answers lay ahead, but so did the daunting prospect of further upheaval. In the stillness of the corridor, Darius took Elara's hand and spoke softly. "We will find the truth together, Elara. You are not alone." His words, filled with both determination and tenderness, provided a fragile beacon of hope amid the chaos. Though the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty, and the repercussions of this mistake loomed large, they resolved to confront whatever came next as one. Darius leaned in, his gaze sharp and unwavering as he fixed his eyes on Dr. Bain. "Doctor, let me be very clear," he began, his tone edged with an unyielding authority that brooked no nonsense. "I'm not here to waste time with vague responses. I have contacts in the media and I'm moments away from calling the editor-in-chief of the country's largest newspaper. I'm sure they'd be thrilled to expose how the most renowned fertility clinic in the region commits serious medical errors." With deliberate intent, he pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his contacts, each movement a calculated reminder of the power he wielded. Dr. Bain's face paled noticeably, though he fought to maintain his composure. "Mr. Almiraj, I'm certain we can resolve this without," he started, but Darius cut him off sharply by raising a hand. "That's not all. I'll also be reaching out to my legal team. Miss Osman has a receipt confirming her visit here." His voice dropped dangerously low as he continued. "This will go to court unless we get answers right now." The doctor swallowed hard, as though the walls were closing in on him. After a long, measured pause, Dr. Bain exhaled slowly and leaned forward, clasping his hands together as though gathering the courage to confess what he had been avoiding all along. "There was a mistake, a serious mistake, and it involves Ms. Osmond," he said, his voice barely rising above a whisper as if fearful that even the walls might betray him. In that charged moment, Elara's heart thundered in her ears. Darius stole a glance at her before turning his hard, unrelenting gaze back to the doctor. His entire body tensed, every muscle coiled in anticipation of a revelation. "Explain, now," he demanded, crossing his arms and his eyes burning with unspoken fury. Dr. Bain swallowed, his eyes downcast with evident shame before he finally managed to speak. "The sperm sample used during the procedure that day was yours, Mr. Almiraj." A deafening silence swallowed the room. At those words, Elara's hand flew to her mouth in shock, her breath catching in her throat. Darius bolted up from his chair, his face contorting in disbelief and barely contained rage. "What the hell are you saying?" he growled in a low voice that carried a dangerous edge. Dr. Bain met his stare steadily, though guilt flickered in his eye. "Due to an administrative error and my unexpected absence that day, which led to Dr. Aldridge covering my duties, Miss Osmond was mistakenly inseminated with your sample, Mr. Aldridge. This should never have happened, and I take full responsibility for this mistake." Elara trembled, barely able to form a coherent thought. Finally, in a small, broken voice, she managed, "These babies?" Dr. Bain nodded solemnly. "They are biologically yours, Mr. Almiraj." Darius ran a hand through his hair as he slowly walked toward the window, his gaze distant as he struggled to absorb the staggering news. "How? How could something like this happen?" he demanded, his voice laced with disbelief and restrained fury. Dr. Bain exhaled heavily, gathering his thoughts before speaking again. "That day was a sequence of missteps," he explained. "Your wife, Mrs. Veronica Almiraj, had originally scheduled the procedure with Dr. Aldridge. He was already prepared in the examination room with your sample and her file in hand. But just before the appointment, Mrs. Almiraj canceled without informing the staff, leaving Dr. Aldridge waiting without updated information." Darius clenched his fists as Elara remained frozen, absorbing every word with shock and horror. Meanwhile, the doctor continued, "Our receptionist, new and inexperienced, working her very first day, checked in Miss Osmond, who had come in complaining of severe abdominal pain. In her haste, the receptionist failed to update the patient records before sending her into the consultation room. By the time she realized the mistake, the procedure was already underway, and she did not want to disturb the doctor's privacy with the patient. She assumed that all details had been clarified during the consultation." The doctor's voice was heavy with remorse as he spoke, and his eyes lowered in regret. A crushing silence fell upon the room, the weight of the error bearing down on everyone present. Elara shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. "I never consented to this," she whispered, her voice fragile and broken. "I had no idea." Despite the shock of the unfolding catastrophe, Darius's eyes reflected a strange mixture of disbelief and something more tender. A realization that, amid the mess, lay the fulfillment of a wish he had long thought impossible. He stepped closer, his normally implacable demeanor softened by a rare vulnerability. Gently, he took Elara's hands in his touch careful and deliberate. "You are giving me something I thought I had lost forever," he murmured, his voice quiet but unwavering. "You are carrying my children, my flesh and blood, while remaining untouched, something I never believed could happen." His grip tightened slightly, as if afraid that the moment might slip away. "I will take care of you throughout your pregnancy. When they are born, you can give them to me, and I promise you that you will be compensated for life. You won't have to worry about anything, I promise you." Elara's lips parted as another tear rolled down her cheek, and the raw weight of his words sank deep into her heart. She inhaled shakily, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. For the first time, she met Darius's gaze not with fear or uncertainty, but with a quiet, determined strength. "Mr. Almiraj," she began, her voice trembling yet resolute, "they will always be your children. That is not something I would ever deny. They are yours, and I understand what they mean to you." Darius regarded her, and for a fleeting second, a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. Before he could reply, Elara continued, her tone firm and filled with conviction. "But don't ask me to walk away from being their mother. Her voice cracked slightly, yet she held his gaze steadily. "They are not just your dream, Mr. Almiraj. They are now my fate as well. My purpose. I am not just a vessel for their birth." Her fingers tightened around his, as if to anchor her very soul to the reality of what was happening. Darius felt something shift deep within him as her words struck a raw chord. A revelation that motherhood was not a matter of ownership or transaction, but a sacred bond that no mistake or circumstance could ever break. At that moment, Dr. Bain cleared his throat, breaking the heavy silence that had enveloped the room. "The clinic will take full financial responsibility for Miss Osman's prenatal care, all medical expenses, and the delivery," he announced. However, after a pause laden with tension, he added, "Hussein, there is something more complicated you need to know." A quiet apprehension settled over the room as Dr. Bain took a deep breath. "We have known each other for years. I was the one who recommended that you freeze your sample before you underwent chemotherapy." Darius nodded slowly, recalling those harrowing moments of his past. The doctor sighed, his eyes somber as he continued. "I also know that you insisted the sample remain a single batch, uncertain if you would survive, but..." A thick, unbearable silence followed as Elara sat quietly, struggling to process everything. "Your wife, Veronica, was here 2 weeks ago," Dr. Bain finally said. Darius's expression darkened instantly. "She demanded to reschedule her insemination procedure," the doctor explained. A slow, unsettling realization crept across Darius's face. His jaw tightened as he recalled that he had explicitly refused to authorize such a procedure, especially after Veronica herself had dismissed it as a sentimental fixation. The doctor hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "She wanted to surprise you. She thought she was sparing you from emotional despair," Dr. Bain muttered, a bitter, humorless smile tugging at his lips. "And in the end, she couldn't proceed because there was nothing left to use." "You're wrong, Hussein," Dr. Bain finally declared, his voice weighted with guilt. "Veronica knew. She authorized the procedure." At those words, Darius's blood ran cold. His hands curled into fists, and his vision blurred with a mix of rage and disbelief. The doctor swallowed hard, visibly shaken by the revelation. "She demanded to be inseminated with another sample," he added quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Darius staggered back, running a hand through his hair as his knees weakened. He sank into a chair and buried his face in his palms, whispering, "This can't be happening. Who is my wife? Who is she really? What kind of person uses a child to manipulate someone?" His voice trembled with restrained fury as he exhaled and stood shakily. Reaching out, he grasped Elara's hand, not out of affection but for the sake of balance amid the tumult. Outside, the sleek Rolls-Royce idled under the glow of the setting sun, its polished exterior reflecting the fading light. Darius walked toward the car's passenger door and held it open with an effortless elegance that belied the storm raging within him. Elara hesitated as she approached. "Mr. Almiraj? Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tentative. Leaning casually against the car, Darius offered her a cryptic smile. "To my estate," he replied smoothly, his tone laced with something unspoken. Elara stiffened. I can't," she managed to say, uncertainty and apprehension mingling in her voice. "What about your wife?" she pressed. Darius met her steady gaze and said, "Elara, just trust me. I have a surprise for my wife. Let's see what she's really made of." With those words, they stepped inside the Rolls-Royce and drove off toward his sprawling estate. On arrival, Veronica was visibly surprised by the unexpected visit. "Why, my dear husband," she remarked with a note of irony in her voice, "is she resigning and you've decided to take her out to dinner as a farewell?" Her tone carried a sharp edge as she attempted to mask her inner turmoil. Darius took a deep breath, holding her gaze as if weighing each word before speaking. "It's not about her, nor is it about the company," he said in a calm yet resolute tone. "It's about us." Veronica's brow furrowed, and she dropped her arms in irritation. "Us? And what exactly could this woman possibly have to say about us?" Darius leaned forward slightly, his voice softening as he continued. "Veronica, she came to me today because she had something to tell me. Something that will change our lives forever." For a brief moment, Veronica's smirk faltered, and though she quickly masked it, the flicker of distrust in her eyes betrayed her inner conflict. "Change our lives?" she echoed sarcastically. Let me guess, some charity project? A donation you're planning to make? Please, Hussein, get to the point. I don't have all night for riddles about a mere employee. Darius exhaled quietly, lowering his eyelids for just a fraction of a second before he spoke the words that had weighed heavily on him since that fateful afternoon. Elara is pregnant. The impact was immediate. Veronica's face stiffened, her expression a mixture of shock and indignation, while Darius's eyes betrayed a turmoil that was nearly unbearable. Darius's eyes narrowed as his voice cut through the charged silence. "Doctor, let me be very clear," he declared, leaning forward with a gaze that was as sharp as it was unwavering. "I'm not here to waste my time with vague or evasive answers. I have media contacts and am moments away from dialing the editor-in-chief of the nation's largest newspaper. They would relish exposing the grave medical errors committed at what is supposed to be the premier fertility clinic in our region." With deliberate intent, he pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his contacts, each tap resonating like the ticking of a doomsday clock. Dr. Bain's face paled noticeably, though he struggled to maintain his professional composure. "Mr. Al-Miraj, I'm confident that we can resolve this matter without resorting to such extremes," he began, only to be sharply interrupted by Darius raising a hand. "That's not all," Darius insisted. "I will also be contacting my legal team. Miss Osman possesses a receipt that confirms her visit to this facility." His tone grew even sterner as he continued. "Unless I receive immediate answers, this matter will be taken to court." The doctor swallowed hard, as if the walls themselves were closing in around him. After a prolonged pause, Dr. Bain leaned forward, his hands clasped as though summoning the courage he had long avoided. "There was a mistake, a serious, irrevocable error, and it involves Miss Osman," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if fearing that even the walls might betray his confession. In that moment, Elara's heart pounded furiously. Darius stole a quick glance at her before his steely eyes returned to the trembling doctor. Every muscle in his body tightened as he demanded, "Explain, now!" He crossed his arms and fixed his unrelenting stare upon Dr. Bain. The doctor hesitated, then finally spoke. "The sperm sample used during the procedure that day was in fact yours, Mr. Al-Miraj." A heavy silence descended. At these words, Elara's hand shot to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock, while Darius sprang from his chair, his face contorting with disbelief and barely restrained rage. "What are you saying?" he barked, in a low, dangerous tone. Dr. Bain met his glare steadily, though guilt shimmered in his eyes. "Due to an administrative error and my sudden absence that day, which necessitated Dr. Aldridge covering for me, Miss Osman was mistakenly inseminated with your sample. This error should never have occurred, and I take full responsibility for it." Elara trembled, struggling to gather her thoughts as she whispered, "These babies?" Dr. Bain nodded solemnly. "They are biologically yours, Mr. Al-Miraj." Darius ran a hand through his hair as he slowly walked toward the window, his gaze lost in thought as he attempted to comprehend the impossible revelation. How could something like this happen?" he demanded, his voice a mix of incredulity and restrained fury. Dr. Bain exhaled deeply before continuing. "That day was a series of unfortunate missteps. Your wife, Mrs. Veronica Al-Miraj, had originally scheduled a procedure with Dr. Aldridge. He was fully prepared with your sample and her file at hand when, at the last minute, Mrs. Al-Miraj canceled without informing the staff. Dr. Aldridge was left waiting with outdated information." Darius's fists clenched as Elara stood frozen, absorbing each damning detail. "Meanwhile," Dr. Bain went on, "our new receptionist, fresh on her first day, checked in Miss Osman, who came in complaining of severe abdominal pain. In her haste and inexperience, the receptionist failed to update the patient records before sending her into the consultation room. By the time the error was noticed, the procedure was already underway, and the staff chose not to disrupt the process." His voice was laden with remorse as he concluded, "I am truly sorry." Elara's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. "I never consented to this," she murmured, her voice fragile and broken. "I had no idea." Yet, amid the chaos, Darius's eyes betrayed a tumultuous mix of disbelief and something akin to hope, a hope that long lay buried in his heart. He stepped closer to Elara, his formidable exterior softening as he gently took her hands in his. "You are giving me something I thought I had lost forever," he said quietly, his tone unwavering. "You are carrying my children, my flesh and blood, while remaining untouched. I never imagined such a miracle could befall me. His grip tightened ever so slightly, as if to anchor the moment. I will take care of you throughout your pregnancy. When the time comes, you may give the children to me, and I promise you will be provided for in every way. You need not worry about a thing. A tear escaped down Elara's cheek as the weight of his words settled in. Gathering her courage, she met his gaze with a newfound strength. "Mr. Al-Miraj," she began, her voice trembling yet resolute. "They will always be your children. I would never deny that. They are yours, and I understand what they mean to you." Darius regarded her for a moment, a fleeting glimmer of something unspoken passing through his eyes. Before he could reply, Elara continued, her tone firm. "But I will never allow you to take away my role as their mother. I am not merely a vessel for their creation. I am their mother, and I will love them no matter what." At that juncture, Dr. Bain cleared his throat, breaking the suffocating silence. "The clinic will assume full financial responsibility for Miss Osman's prenatal care, all medical expenses and the delivery," he announced. Then, hesitating, he added, "However, there is something further you must know, Mr. Al-Miraj." A palpable tension settled over the room as Dr. Bain took a deep breath. "We have known each other for years. I was the one who advised you to freeze your sample before you underwent chemotherapy." Darius nodded slowly, haunted by memories of his darkest days. "I also know that you insisted the sample remain as one, uncertain of your survival, but—" Dr. Bain paused, and a heavy silence filled the space. "Your wife, Veronica, visited this clinic 2 weeks ago and demanded to reschedule her insemination procedure." Darius's expression darkened at these words. The doctor continued, "She intended to surprise you. She claimed she was sparing you from emotional distress, yet she could not proceed because there was nothing left to use." Dr. Bain's voice wavered as he added, "But you must understand, Mr. Al-Miraj, that Veronica authorized the procedure." The revelation sent a jolt through Darius. His blood ran cold as his hands curled into fists and he sank into a chair, burying his face in his palms while whispering, "This can't be happening. Who is my wife? Who is she really? How can someone use a child as a tool for manipulation?" His voice trembled with restrained fury as he slowly stood. Reaching out for balance, Darius grasped Elara's hand. Outside, the sleek Rolls-Royce idled under the glow of a sinking sun, its polished surface reflecting the tumult of emotions within him. He walked toward the passenger door, holding it open with an effortless elegance that belied the storm raging inside. Elara hesitated near the car. "Mr. Al-Miraj, where are we going?" she asked softly. Leaning casually against the car, Darius offered a cryptic smile. "To my estate," he replied, his tone laced with something unspoken. Elara stiffened. I can't," she managed, uncertainty and apprehension mingling in her voice. "What about your wife?" she pressed. Darius met her gaze steadily. "Elara, trust me, I have a surprise plan for Veronica. Let's see what she's truly made of." With that, they climbed into the car and drove away. At the estate, Veronica's face shifted from confusion to barely restrained fury. Her eyes locked onto Elara, who instinctively stepped back, clutching the fabric of her dress as though it might make her vanish. "What?" Veronica's voice rang out, sharp as a blade. "Pregnant? And what exactly does that have to do with us?" Darius remained unshaken, as if he had anticipated her reaction. He stepped closer, closing the gap between them, his voice firm yet composed. "It has everything to do with us," he stated, "because the children Elara carries are mine." Veronica's laughter was immediate but devoid of any humor, cold, hollow, and cutting. "Is this some kind of joke, Darius?" she demanded. "It's not a joke, Veronica," he replied steadily. "Elara came to me today to explain that there was a grave mistake at Nova Hope Fertility Clinic. She went there a month ago expecting a routine checkup, but your insemination sample, which you had canceled, was mistakenly used on her on that very day." Veronica's body went rigid, as if his words had physically struck her. The room fell into an eerie silence. After several agonizing seconds, she exhaled sharply, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "How incredibly convenient," she muttered. "A poor immigrant girl ends up pregnant with the child of a wealthy man. Tell me, should I believe this wasn't your plan all along?" Darius's patience snapped. "Enough, Veronica," he roared, his voice echoing through the room with commanding force. "This is the clinic's mistake. not Elara's. She had no hand in any of this. Veronica folded her arms, her expression hard and unyielding, and glared at Elara with open disdain. "She's lying! Open your eyes, Darius!" she spat bitterly. Darius's tone turned cold as he replied, "And how exactly can you be so sure, Veronica?" Stepping closer, her lips curled into a slow, knowing smile as she whispered, "Because, my love, she isn't the one carrying your children. I am." Darius's posture stiffened, cautious and rigid. Veronica savored the moment before continuing. 2 weeks ago, I decided to surprise you. I went ahead with my own insemination. You can verify this with Dr. Johnson yourself." With swift precision, she produced a sonogram image from her pocket. Holding it up, she fixed her eyes on him. "In fact, I had an ultrasound today with Dr. Harrington. I'm carrying twins, Darius. Look, 2 gestational sacs." Darius took the image carefully, studying it in silence as the room grew heavy with expectation. Slowly, he lifted his gaze back to Veronica. His voice was calm, measured, yet filled with a depth of emotion. "I don't need to call any doctor, Veronica. I have no doubts about your pregnancy, and I do not question what this image shows." Veronica's lips curled into a victorious smile as she stepped closer, wrapping her arms around his neck in what seemed an intimate embrace. "Perfect," she purred, her tone honeyed with triumph. "Then let's get rid of this imposter, give her money and send her away. Or I'll do it myself. I'm prepared to be generous. You know how charitable I can be." Slowly, Darius withdrew his arms from her embrace, creating a deliberate distance that contrasted with the gravity of his next words. "I do not doubt your pregnancy, Veronica. I don't even question that you're expecting twins," he stated calmly. "But know this, they are not mine." Veronica's expression shifted in an instant. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and a sharp, incredulous gasp escaped her lip. "What are you saying? That's absurd," she snapped. "Call Dr. Johnson this minute." Darius tilted his head slightly, his voice steady. "Are you sure that's what you want?" She practically screamed in response, her tone laced with desperation. Before Darius could reply, he added slowly, "Before I do, perhaps there is something you should know, Veronica. I just came from the clinic with Elara." A flash of panic crossed her face as she instinctively stepped back, torn between outrage and fear. "I will destroy that incompetent doctor. I'll have that clinic shut down immediately," she fumed. Darius shook his head, his eyes locked onto hers with quiet finality. "You don't have the authority to do that, Veronica. The only ones who can take legal action are me, the biological father, or Elara, the true victim of this error. And neither of us intends to pursue that path." His voice carried a finality that left no room for negotiation. "After all, these children, the dream I have nurtured my entire life, are now a reality, and Elara does not regret becoming a mother." Veronica's composure shattered. "And what do you expect me to do now?" she spat bitterly. "Everything I did was out of love for you." Darius's eyes softened with a mixture of sorrow and resolve as he replied, "Veronica, love does not manipulate. Love does not deceive. What you did was not born out of love, it was about control, and that is something you have never understood. A child should never be used as a bargaining chip to salvage a failing marriage. I cannot remain with someone who thinks that way." The grand estate, usually a sanctuary of opulence and power, now felt stifling with unspoken tension. Veronica, her poise unraveling, glared at Darius with burning resentment, unable to process the stark truth in his words. "What are you trying to say?" she demanded, her voice wavering between disbelief and barely contained rage. Darius inhaled deeply, his stance unwavering as he declared, "Expect the divorce papers soon." His voice was a low, steady force that left Veronica momentarily breathless. For a brief moment, she swayed before regaining her footing, and then a venomous smile spread across her face, dripping with bitter mockery. "If you divorce me, I'll ensure this pregnancy never sees the light of day," she threatened coldly. "Why should I carry children that I cannot use to keep you?" At that moment, Elara, who had been silently observing, stepped forward, her voice thick with desperation. "Mr. Almiraj, you can't let this happen. You have to stop this. Maybe you shouldn't go through with the divorce," she pleaded. Veronica let out a humorless laugh, gesturing mockingly toward Elara. "See, darling, Even your employee understands better than you do." Darius, unmoved by her provocation, maintained his steady gaze and replied firmly, "Veronica, you conceived these children for all the wrong reasons. Not out of maternal love. Not even out of love for me. It was pure selfishness. I know the divorce settlement will grant you half of everything I own, as is your right, but I offer you this instead. If you carry these children to term and give them life, I will waive my right to any portion of your asset. You keep everything?" Veronica's eyes narrowed in disbelief as she searched Darius's face for any sign of weakness. "What I want is you, Darius," she said softly, as though trying to lure him back with desperate promises. "If you stay, I'll go through with the pregnancy." But Darius shook his head resolutely. "I will proceed with the divorce, Veronica, and if you deny these children their right to be born, I will dissolve my business partnership with your company. You know exactly what that would mean for your empire. It will crumble." Veronica clenched her jaw, feeling the ground slip from beneath her as her grip on the situation unraveled. After a long, heavy silence, she exhaled sharply, her expression a mix of frustration and reluctant surrender. "Fine," she spat. "I won't stop the birth, but I have one condition." Darius watched warily as Veronica leaned in, her voice dripping with cruel satisfaction. "I will give birth to them, but the moment they are born, they will be put up for adoption. You always wanted biological children, Darius, but let's see if you can bear to raise children that aren't truly yours. Consider it your punishment," Elara gasped, clutching her chest in horror at the callousness of her words, then turned to Darius with a trembling plea. "Sir, please, accept them, raise them, I will take care of them. Don't abandon these innocent lives." Darius, taken aback by Elara's kindness, turned his gaze from Veronica to her. Holding his head high, he responded with quiet determination, "Then it is settled, Veronica. It will be my honor to be a father to all of them. I will be the luckiest man in the world, blessed with 4 children." Veronica scoffed, crossing her arms in disdain. "Fine, but make sure the terms are clearly outlined in the divorce papers." That night, Darius packed his belongings and left the Almiraj estate with Elara. They moved into one of his other properties, a more modest yet still luxurious home, where they would begin a new chapter of their lives. Although they slept in separate rooms, the daily moments they shared wove an unbreakable bond between them. Over the next 9 months, their lives were filled with challenges, intense emotions, and startling revelations. Elara faced her pregnancy with grace and courage, earning the admiration of those around her, while Veronica, trapped in her own storm of resentment and regret, struggled with the consequences of her choices. Then, the day arrived. Elara was the first to give birth, welcoming identical twin boys who bore a striking resemblance to Darius, golden-haired, light-eyed, with an air of quiet dignity inherited from their father. Hours later, Veronica delivered fraternal twins. However, the moment she laid eyes on them, a wave of shock and bitter rejection washed over her. Their deep brown skin, dark curls, and distinctive features presented a truth she had never anticipated, hardening her expression into one of visceral denial. Darius had already made his decision. In that defining moment, as the last vestiges of the tumultuous events slowly faded into memory, Darius resolved to honor the promise he had made to himself and to his heart. True to his word, the very instant the children were born, he embraced them as his own, each tiny life a miraculous testament to fate's unpredictable design. Yet he did not take this step in isolation. When he looked upon Elara, he saw far more than a woman who had borne him twin sons. He saw a luminous soul whose capacity for love was boundless. A love that defied the rigid expectations of society and rose triumphantly above the errors of the past. Standing in the soft glow of the hospital's waiting room, where sterile white walls met the gentle hum of hopeful voices and hushed whispers of recovery, Darius turned to Elara. His voice, steady yet trembling with the weight of his emotions, carried the cadence of a man who had weathered many storms. "Elara," he said, his tone imbued with sincerity and passion, "I do not merely want you to be the mother of the twins you carried. I want you to be a mother to all these children, for they have found a home in my heart and in my life. Will you marry me? Will you join me in building a family where every child is cherished as a gift of life?" For a long moment, the air seemed to stand still. Elara's eyes, already brimming with tears of both joy and disbelief, shimmered with an inner light that spoke of hope renewed. Her heart pounded so fiercely that she could scarcely catch her breath. In a voice so soft it barely rose above a whisper, she answered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." To her, each of the 4 precious lives was not merely a consequence of a grievous error, but a blessing, a divine gift from Allah, meant to be celebrated, unburdened by the divisions of race or the mistakes that once tore lives apart. 2 months after their arduous recovery and the long, winding journey through sorrow and revelation, they celebrated their wedding in a new home, a place filled with joy, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. On that unforgettable day, Elara's family traveled from distant Konya, and close friends gathered in a grand celebration that blended tradition with modernity. At the heart of the festivities were the 4 innocent souls, 2 with golden locks that glinted like rays of the morning sun, and 2 with deep brown curls that spoke of rich, earthy heritage. Their laughter filled every corner of the home, a joyous chorus that eclipsed all past misgivings. The union of Darius and Elara was more than a simple marriage. It was a powerful vow of unity, acceptance, and unwavering devotion. It was a declaration that family is not determined solely by blood, but by the choices one makes to love and protect one another unconditionally. In the months that followed, the couple settled into a rhythm of everyday miracles. Their modest yet elegant home became a sanctuary where each room echoed with laughter and quiet moments of tenderness. The children, each unique in appearance and personality, grew and thrived in an environment where love transcended all boundaries. Their playful chatter in the hallways, the pitter-patter of tiny feet, and the innocent questions about the world filled the space with a palpable sense of renewal. Darius and Elara, despite the shadows of their past, found themselves enveloped in a new reality. A reality in which every challenge was met with mutual support, and every tear was met with a comforting embrace. Darius often reflected on the extraordinary turn his life had taken. In a world that often measured worth by pedigree and wealth, he had discovered that true fortune lay in the intangible treasures of the heart. His children, born out of a catastrophic error that might have been condemned by fate, instead became the cornerstone of his renewed hope. And in Elara, he found a partner who embodied grace, courage, and an unyielding spirit. A spirit that had faced unimaginable trials and emerged with a resolve to build a better future. Together, they vowed that their family would be defined not by the circumstances of their birth, but by the love that bound them together. As the years slowly passed, their lives wove into a tapestry of shared experiences. Elara faced her pregnancy with dignity, her every step a testament to the strength that had carried her through moments of despair. Neighbors and friends marveled at her resilience, and even those who had once doubted her were moved by her quiet determination. Darius, ever the steadfast pillar in their lives, worked tirelessly to ensure that his children's future would be secure. He immersed himself in every aspect of their upbringing, from the sleepless nights of infancy to the joyous celebrations of each milestone, affirming with every action that he would never abandon the family he had come to cherish so deeply. The celebration of their wedding had been only the beginning of a new chapter in their extraordinary story. Under one roof, in a home that had once echoed with the pain of past mistakes, a fresh narrative unfolded. One where love and unity reigned supreme. In this new world, barriers of race, circumstance, or history held no sway. Instead, the true measure of a family was found in the willingness to embrace one another fully, to share in both sorrow and joy, and to support one another unconditionally. Darius and Elara's union was a shining example of this ideal, a living, breathing affirmation that love could indeed create miracles. And so, as the final chapter of this remarkable saga was being written, a powerful truth emerged. Love is boundless. It is not confined by the limitations of blood or circumstance. Rather, it is forged in the decisions we make to open our hearts, to protect one another, and to cherish every single moment. Real love, pure, unadulterated love, has the power to transform lives, to heal even the deepest wounds, and to create bonds that defy all conventional definitions of family. In the gentle twilight of their new beginning, Darius and Elara stood together, surrounded by the lively voices of their children and the comforting warmth of home. Their story was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a narrative of redemption and hope born from unexpected origins. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that no matter how tangled the threads of fate might seem, love ultimately weaves them together into a fabric strong enough to withstand the harshest storms. And there you have it, an extraordinary journey born from a mistake but transformed by compassion, resilience, and the courage to love beyond expectations. This story reminds us that family isn't always defined by blood, and sometimes the most powerful connections are forged through kindness, sacrifice, and the willingness to heal. Now we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story moved you the most? Do you believe love can truly overcome even the deepest wounds? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your insight might touch someone else's heart today. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a moment of inspiration. Thank you for watching, for feeling, and for being part of our growing community of empathy and hope. Until next time, stay kind, stay open-hearted, and always believe that love, real love, can create miracles.